Hello everybody, Mr. Ristow here. I thought it might be helpful if I made a short little video dealing with supply and demand. This is the information that you find in chapters 4, 5, and 6, because what I'm seeing here on some of the quizzes, some are good, some are very good, and some of the assignments, some of those are good too. But I see some common mistakes coming through, so I thought I'd give you kind of a quick overview of supply and demand. I'm going to go through and kind of set up a graph here. Dealing with demand first and then supply. And I'm going to go through this under the impression that you have already read the textbook. It's very, very important that you read the textbook, chapters 4, 5, and 6. So I'm going to be working under that assumption and using terminology and whatnot when I set this up. All right, so I'm going to assume that you already know some of these terms and whatnot. But there are a few things with supply and demand that it's important to remember when you're making your graphs. So what I'm going to do here first is, by the way, I'm using Chrome Canvas here. So hopefully this will come through and you'll be able to see this on your end. So what I'm going to do here first is I'm going to set up my axes. And like I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to deal with demand first. I kind of have a mouse that kind of has a mind of its own, so just bear with me when I'm setting up my axes. Now, it's important to remember when I set up my axes that with any graph, that I label everything. One of the common mistakes that I'm seeing is that you are not completely labeling your graphs. Curves have to be labeled, axes have to be labeled. So with supply and demand, price always goes on the vertical, quantity always goes on the horizontal. All right. And since I'm going to deal with demand, we know the demand curve is a downward sloping curve to the right. And because I need to label everything, I'm going to label my curve with a capital D. I can label it D or D1, whatever, just as long as it's labeled. Now, one of the most important things you have to remember with supply and demand is you must be able to distinguish between a change in quantity demanded and a change in demand. Okay. Now, your book talks about what a change in quantity demanded means. A change in quantity demand basically means that when the price of a good changes, the quantity demanded of that good is going to change. So if the price goes up, the quantity demand is going to go down. And when the price goes down, the quantity demand is going to go up. So if we have the market here for, let's say, we're going to call this the market for Pepsi. And it's important that when you're drawing graphs, if you need to or asked to, that you label what your market is. Here's the market for Pepsi. Now we just have a demand curve here. So I'm going to show you what the change in quantity demand looks like. All right. Let's say that let's say we're currently operating in the market right here, and in the market we have, let's say 100. We'll say that this is in thousands here. So 100,000 cans of Pepsis and 100,000 cans of Pepsis, and each can is, let's say, well, let's just keep it simple, $1. Okay. And that's going to be $1 there. Now, if for some reason Pepsi decides to lower the price on each can of Pepsi, so let's say that they're going to lower the price and they're going to drop it to, let's say 50 cents, okay, for a can. This is now 50 cents. And that means, I just said, that as the price goes down, the quantity demand is going to go up. Right? We went from a price of $1 at 100,000 cans from Q1, that quantity, to this new quantity, which now 200,000 cans are being demanded at a price of 50 cents. So we're going to label this is my new quantity, Q2. All right. So you notice that when the price changes, the graph shows movement along the curve, right, from point 1 to point 2. Okay, that is a change in quantity demanded. As the price went down, quantity demand went up. It went from Q1 to Q2. Movement along the curve is how you show that graphically. All right. Now, this is different than a change in demand. Your book talks about any number of 4, 5, or 6 determinants of demand, or factors of demand. I just call them curve shifters because they shift the curve. So if something other than the price is affecting demand, then we have what is called a change in demand. All right. So if I can get a different colored demand curve, let's say that there are just simply more buyers of Pepsi in the market, right? One of the major determinants of demand is that there is a increased number of people, or the market is bigger. There are more people buying Pepsi than there were before, right, at each available price. So what that means is something other than the price changed, right? The price is still $1. We're going to start back over with $1. But what that means now is that we have now a change in demand. So we have an entire shift of the curve that's going to take place. Okay? And we always signify an increase in demand as a curve shift to the right. Okay? And this is going to be, if I can get a different pencil here, this is going to be labeled now as D2. Okay? So this is my curve shift to the right. This signifies an increase in demand, because notice what's happening. At $1, the price didn't change, right? This isn't something where Pepsi decided to just unilaterally change the price of Pepsi, can of Pepsi. It's still $1. But more people now are buying it because there's simply more buyers in the market. Okay? So now instead of the 100,000 cans that were being purchased at $1, now, because there are just simply more people, there are now, let's say, 250,000 people, right? 250,000 cans are being demanded now at $1. This is a change in demand. This is a shift of the curve that is due because of something other than price. Okay? It could be a price change that's expected to be made in the future. It could be the number of people. More people are buying it. It could be a positive headline or news story, marketing, anything. In theory, it could be anything else other than a price change. All right? So when it's only a price change, we have a change in quantity demand, movement along the curve from point 1 to point 2. If it's something other than price, we have a shift of the curve. Okay? Now, we could also say if there are fewer people, for example, buying Pepsi, then we would have a decrease in demand. And a decrease of the curves is always a shift of the curve to the left, down to the left. So this is D3 down here. Okay? So that would mean then at a price of $1, you notice this, at a price of $1, instead of the original 100,000 cans that were being purchased at $1, if we have something other than the price acting on Pepsi, so maybe there are fewer people buying it, maybe there are just fewer buyers of Pepsi in the market. Maybe the population of a country has gone down and they're buying less Pepsi. So if that's the case, instead of the 100,000 at Q1, now we have 50,000, for example, that are being bought. And we would label this as Q3. Right? So this would also be a decrease in demand, my shift of my curve from D to D3. Something other than the price has changed the demand for Pepsi. That is arguably the most important concept you need to know when it comes to supply and demand. You need to know what is the difference between a change in demand versus a change in quantity demanded. All right. So now let me erase this, and we'll deal with supply. All right. And the same concept applies with supply. And that is, you need to know then the difference between a change in supply and a change in quantity supplied. Okay. Now, the other item that you need to know, remember I said that there were two. The concept of change in demand and change in quantity demanded, or change in supply and change in quantity supplied, that's just basically one factor that you need to know. The other thing, of course, you need to know is you need to know your curve shifters. So make sure you know your 4, 5, or 6 major curve shifters when it comes to supply and demand. Okay. So let me get up a new pair of axes for supply. Okay, here are my axes for supply. And remember, we are labeling these as price, right? On the vertical, quantity always goes on the horizontal. Now, we're going to make a supply curve, and the supply curve is a upward to the right sloping curve, right, that looks like so, and we must label that as S. Now, the reason why it's upward sloping is that we know that the law of supply states that as the price goes up, quantity supplied goes up, all right? So as price goes up, quantity supplied also goes up, and as price goes down, quantity supplied is going to go down. There is the law of supply in action right there. So again, with supply, we're still going to use our market for Pepsi, except now with supply, you have to put yourself into the shoes of Pepsi producers. Okay, we're not buyers of Pepsi anymore. We're the producers of Pepsi. So if we're currently here on our supply curve, here's the current market for the supply of Pepsi, and we'll keep it consistent. We'll say that there are 100,000 cans. This is in thousands. Okay. This is in thousands of cans. And there are 100,000 cans that producers are able and willing to make available for sale at a price of, again, keeping it consistent, of $1. Okay. Now, the law of supply says, notice, I told you the most important thing you need to remember is this concept, the difference between a change in supply and a change in quantity supplied. Well, if Pepsi decides just to, if Pepsi decides to, or if they notice in the market that the price is rising for some reason, right, maybe from the demand side of things, if they see that the price of Pepsi is rising, right, and the price, let's say, creeps up to $2 a can, well, that sends a signal to the producers of Pepsi to make more available Pepsi in the marketplace. Okay, so if the only thing that changes is the price, then we have a change in quantity supplied. We have that written down here already. As the price goes up, which is what it did, right? It went from $1 to $2. Then the quantity supplied is going to increase. So at $1, 100,000 cans were supplied in the market. But as the price went up, suppliers of Pepsi just see that in the marketplace and they make more available for sale. How much more? Well, in our little example here, the total now is going to be 200,000 cans in the marketplace. Okay? This is a change in quantity supplied. There's the Greek symbol for a change in. So this is a change in quantity supplied. Movement along the curve, movement from point 1 to point 2. All right. Now, I already showed you on the demand side of things the difference between a change in quantity supplied and a change in quantity demanded and a change in demand. Same holds true here. A change in quantity supplied when only the price changes. Graphically, that's shown as movement along the curve. But if it's something other than the price, right, there are about a half a dozen factors or determinants or curve shifters that will shift the supply curve. Okay, now let's say that one of the major curve shifters, major determinants of supply, is the cost of producing that good or service. And let's say that for Pepsi, there's a lot of ingredients, right, that go into Pepsi, corn syrup and all this stuff. Well, that's sugar. So let's say that the cost of sugar starts to rise. And since sugar is an input, right, it's used to make Pepsi, producers aren't going to be able to make as much Pepsi as they used to because they would be losing profits if they continue to do that. In other words, each Pepsi producer is going to be paying more for their sugar, right, to make each can of Pepsi. Well, at $2, the price didn't change. The price of Pepsi didn't change, not yet anyway. But the cost of buying an input did. Okay, so one of the major curve shifters for the supply side of things are the price of resources or inputs used to make a good. Same would hold true for steel, for example, for automobile manufacturers. Well, here we have the price of sugar rising to make a can of Pepsi. And if the price of a resource is rising, then producers of Pepsi aren't going to make as many cans available for sale. And what we have is a decrease in supply. Graphically, that is a curve shift to the left. Okay. The one thing you want to remember too about supply and demand is using the terms left and right. Whenever you show an increase in supply or demand, the curve shifts to the right. Whenever you show a decrease, whether it's supply or demand, the curve shifts to the left. All right. So now, if the price of an input rises, here in this case sugar, the supply for Pepsi is going to go down. So if we go back to our $1 price, we originally had 100,000 cans being made available for sale. But if the price of the input rises, now producers at that $1, right, are going to only, let's say, make 25,000 cans available for sale. Okay, here we go at Q3. All right. So when the cost of a good or cost of an input rises, then supply is going to decrease. This is a change in supply. Notice the difference. This is, excuse me, let me erase that. This is a change in, let me get my other pencil. This is a change in supply. Okay. Where we have an entire shift of the curve. Now, again, I'm working on the assumption that you've looked at your determinants, your curve shifters for both supply and demand. I think a lot of you were having problems with the graphs. So in this case, if the cost of sugar decreased, or if the price of an input, right, for Pepsi starts to go down, if it's cheaper to make each can, then we would say we have an increase in supply. An increase in supply is when the supply curve shifts to the right, like this. Okay, that would be an increase. So now Pepsi manufacturers are going to be making more cans of Pepsi available for sale at each price. So instead of our original $1 where they were making 100,000 available, now at $1 they're going to make, let's say, 250,000 available for sale. Okay, we're going to label that Q4. All right, so that's a change in supply. That's a shifting of the curve. That's due to the fact that something other than the price is causing supply to change. If it's only the price, if the price goes up, then we have a change in quantity supplied. And that is reflected on the graph as movement along the curve. Okay? Now, when you put the two together, which is what Chapter 6 talks about, I'll do one example here where you're going to be putting both supply and demand together. Okay? So if I can get my new pencil, we'll make a new drawing. And I think what I'll do is use the example. There is a handout, I think it coincides with 6.1 or 6.2, one of the assignments, where the market is on the assignment computer games. Okay? And this will be our market then for computer games. And I'll do one quick example here dealing with computer games. All right? So we need a supply curve in the market, and then we also need a demand curve, the demand for games in the marketplace. Okay, and we'll label that S and D. Okay, And we can't forget our labels here. That is the price, and here's the quantity. Where the two curves meet, of course, is our equilibrium price, right? We'll label that with an E. And we have an equilibrium price. We're going to say, let's say the games, I don't know what a computer game goes for nowadays. We'll just say $70. Okay, and at that equilibrium price, the equilibrium quantity in the marketplace, let's say, is 100,000 games. This is going to be in thousands again. Okay, now let's say, by the way, you always want to start your graphs here in equilibrium unless you're told otherwise. Okay, so what you then want to do is read the scenario, read what the change is, what is the action in the marketplace. So let's say that the change in the marketplace is that, let's say that there is a headline in the New York Times tomorrow that says spending 3 hours a day playing in video games will improve elementary or students' grades by 75%, something like that. All right. Now, in that scenario, you notice there was nothing there about a change in the price of games. Right? So the first thing you want to ask yourself is, does that scenario, is that going to affect supply or demand first? Okay. The scenario was a headline that said, spending 3 or 4 hours playing video games a day will help improve students' grades. Well, that sounds like a marketing thing to me, right? An advertising thing to me. So that's going to influence, it sounds like to me, demand first, right? It's going to affect the buyers of games. So once we've determined that it's going to affect demand first, we know that we're probably going to have to be doing something with that demand curve, okay? And nothing in that scenario said anything about just the price changing, right? I didn't say computer game manufacturers decide to raise the price. Something other than the price change is acting on demand. In this case, the curve shifter might be, some sort of ad, right, which is affecting consumer. If you notice in your book, right, you probably read about one of the major curve shifters of demand is taste, right? They're trying to influence people's tastes. Technically, it could be anything. So that means since we have something other than the price changing, the curve here, the demand curve, is going to be shifting, right? Now, you can use some common sense. A lot of this is common sense. If you read online that there's a study that's been done that says 4 hours of playing video games is going to help improve your grades, you're probably going to go out and buy more video games, right? So that's going to affect demand. So the next question you're going to ask is demand going to increase or is it going to decrease? Well, in this case, demand certainly is going to increase. And remember I said from 10 minutes ago that whenever we have an increase, whether it be supply or demand, we shift the curve, the respective curve, to the right. Okay? So here, assuming that supply stays constant, which it does, we have an increase in demand because of spending more time playing video games is going to improve your grades. Curve shifts to D2, and notice I actually did shift the curve. I just didn't, put an arrow there and say, here's my new curve. I actually drew my curve. I have to establish a new equilibrium price and quantity, so we're going to label that as E2. And now there are going to be 200,000 games that are going to be demanded, right? Because people are reading about how it's going to improve their children's grades. And because there's an increase in demand, that's going to put pressure on the price, right? Assuming that supply stays constant. And the price is going to start to rise in the marketplace from, let's say, $70 to $80, right? So the price is going to rise and the quantity is going to rise, right? And that's how I would finish this one off, right? So as a result of the increase in demand, this is a change in demand. As a result of that, the new equilibrium price in the market is now going to be $80, right? And the new equilibrium quantity is going to be 200,000 games, all right? Now notice that whenever we have a change in demand or a shift of the curve, we have a change in quantity on the other side. In other words, this change in demand here that you saw is leading to a change in quantity supplied, right? A change in quantity, movement along the curve, movement from this point to that point. And doesn't that make sense? That should make sense to you. Because as demand is increasing, the price is starting to go up. Well, if you're the producer or manufacturer of these computer games, and as you see the price in the market go up, aren't you going to make more games available for sale? Because you stand to gain more in revenue and hopefully in profit. And that's what's happening here. As demand is increasing, the demand on the consumer side, they're buying more games. That's putting pressure on the price. And as the price goes up, right, we saw the price go up, the quantity supplied is going to be increasing. Okay, now that's basically it. It is very important that you read chapters 4, 5, and 6, and that you understand at least one major concept. And again, that is the difference between a change in demand, like we had here, and a change in quantity demanded, and a change in supply versus a change in quantity supplied. And in order to do that, you have to practice, you have to draw the graphs, and you have to very, very importantly read the textbook, chapters 4, 5, and 6. Okay? Do the handouts, the one specific handout that deals with computer games. There are about 13, 14 scenarios, I think, there that will help you. This was the first one, I think, that deals with games, or it's similar to the first one. So let me know if you have any questions, if you're still confused. But hopefully this will help the majority of you who are starting to get into supply and demand now. Okay, or at least putting the two curves together. Okay, guys, hope this helps, and we will talk to you soon. Bye for now.